Cape Town winters can be bleak and brutal, especially for those living without adequate shelter.
Ons swaar bly hierso. Sien dat ons 4 jaar al hierso bly. Sien dat die regering ons beloof het ons moes 'n jaar gebly het. En na dat jaar sal ons in huise gewees het. Dis nou al 4 jaar, ons bly nog altyd waar ons is.
On a wintry day in May 1999, an impoverished community living in Wallerstein, Cape Town, took drastic action. Their case was hailed as a constitutional landmark, significantly impacting government's housing policy. But did policy translate into practice for this community? Known as the Grootboom case, it was named after a woman called Irene Grootboom. She lived in an impoverished informal settlement without basic services. Many had placed their names on a waiting list for low-income housing. But as time wore on, about 900 adults and children moved onto adjacent land that had been earmarked for low-cost housing. But this was privately owned land. On the 18th of May 1999, the municipality sent in bulldozers to demolish the settlement. Rendered homeless, the community members took shelter on a sports field with only plastic sheeting to protect them from the elements. Under the name of Irene Grootboom and 900 others, they subsequently launched an urgent application in the Cape High Court, basing their case on Section 26 of the Constitution, which states that everyone has the right to adequate housing, and Section 28(1)(c, that states children have the right to shelter. The High Court ruled partly in their favour, but in 2000, the then newly formed Democratic Alliance and the ruling ANC appealed to the Constitutional Court. The government argued that although it was taking reasonable steps to provide housing for all South Africans, it did not have the resources to accommodate everyone.
What we saw in the Grootboom case was, in a sense, constitutional democracy at work.
The Constitutional Court ruled in favour of Grootboom based on reasonableness, prioritising shelter for those most desperately in need.
Our courts, guided by what is required of them in terms of the Constitution and what role they're supposed to be playing as a check, interrogated the reasonableness of state action in delivering on its constitutional and statutory obligations to respect, promote, and progressively realise the right to access to adequate housing. The court's findings in the Grootboom case eventually led to the National Housing Code, which articulates government's housing programs and specifically included, for instance, the emergency housing program, which was meant to respond to the most vulnerable short-term housing needs of people. The Constitution can't just remain a piece of paper. It has to be made real in the lives of people. There was a lot of hope and hence a lot of trust given to the new democratic state.
After decades of apartheid's racially segregated housing policy and land expropriation, democracy's rallying cry was to provide adequate housing for all. In 1994, the government launched the Reconstruction and Development Programme, which subsequently became the Breaking New Ground Housing Plan. The goal was to eradicate informal housing by 2014, and there were some successes. By 2001, over 1 million housing subsidies were provided to 5 million of the 12.5 million South Africans requiring housing. But cracks were starting to show. The backlog was growing faster than delivery. So was corruption, interpolitical conflict, and challenges with securing appropriate land for housing. A prime example of this was the 2004 National Housing Department's N2 Gateway project in Cape Town. Irregularities on the housing waiting list provoked backyard shack dwellers to occupy homes they suspected had been allocated to those who had jumped the queue. In 2007, the city of Cape Town constructed Blikkiesdorp, a sprawling settlement of 10 shacks as a temporary relocation area, or TRA. It was located 25 kilometres outside the city, and together with several other so-called TRAs, Blikkiesdorp has become a dumping ground for the poor.
where people live matters, where housing is provided matters, because it is so deeply interconnected with access to services and opportunities. And so when there isn't this transparency around how things are going to work and clarity and constant engagement, it sows the seeds of conflict.
Today, South Africa's housing policy is in crisis. The COVID pandemic has also swelled the numbers of informal settlements and the homeless.
In the 2022 to 2023 year, the Department of Human Settlements reported a delivery of 33,892 fully subsidized homes and 25,322 service sites, which is actually 7 times fewer formal homes that were provided by government compared to the peak of housing delivery during, for instance, the 1998 and 1999 years. And, this is, of course, concerning. It's the rate of delivery that's particularly concerning. The housing backlog is critical, and perhaps even more critical is, the question of how will this be addressed.
In May this year, a report was launched by the Development Action Group, Human Sciences Research Council, and the National Association of Social Housing Organizations. The report focuses on releasing land for integrated housing, the imperatives of interdepartmental cooperation and community participation.
And land release is one of those very meaningful tools to drive our economy, to actually realize the value of the urban dividend in a way that actually provides us with an ability to can actually turn the fortunes of our cities.
We could be simplifying and speeding up the process of releasing land for well-located affordable housing a lot more. The existing process is clearly cumbersome and is clearly struggling in many ways, and ultimately it's the government that holds the power to change its own systems.
But the constitutional promise and jurisprudence triumph of the Grootboom case have not translated into practice for the community in whose name it had been won.
The court also has to act within its constitutional mandate. Yes, to interrogate and question whether or not the state is complying with its constitutional and statutory obligations, and in instances where that is not the case, to give effective remedy. But it also cannot overstep into the domain of the executive. What it can do is say your failure to do certain things is a constitutional breach. And what you need to come back with is the plan.
As hulle belofte nagekom het en vir ons die huise gegee het wat hulle ons beloof het, dan sou dit baie beter af nou gewees.
Irene Grootboom might have given a human face to informal dwellers, but she died in 2008 at the age of 39 without a decent house. Left out in the cold, her community might have won the championship, but as they reportedly lamented, they never received the trophy.